Okay, citizens of these here United States of America, let's have an honest chat about immigration. Because our friends on the right seem to be obsessed with the southern border crisis, like Tucker Carlson continuing to promote the racist doctrine of white replacement theory, the idea that Joe Biden has opened our borders to let in Latin American Democrats, not a thing, and MAGA Republicans are still obsessed with building a wall that Mexico won't pay for, I thought it would be nice to have a measured discussion with some facts, definitions, and context. UNFTR. Let's begin by dismantling some right-wing talking points. Hispanic Americans are no more Democrats than they are Republicans. Do many of them vote Democratic? Sure. Considering they've been so vilified by the right, can you blame them? Also, Hispanic voters are not a monolithic group. For example, voters of Cuban heritage are predominantly Republicans, and many migrant families are far more conservative and religious in nature, which makes them a more natural fit for what used to be the Republican Party. The loss of the Hispanic vote over the past few decades was a self-inflicted wound. Funny enough, perhaps the most Hispanic-friendly Republican president that we've ever had was George W. Bush.
Siéntese. Bienvenidos.
Who brought the difference in Democratic to Republican voting within 18 points. Just 2 cycles prior, the disparity was above 50 points when Clinton beat Dole. That kind of trend could have leveled the playing field within a couple of presidential cycles, but the Republicans decided to lurch to the far right and demonize anyone who wasn't a white, American-born Christian. So the Hispanic voting bloc is the Democrats to lose, and Tucker Carlson and company aren't doing the Republicans any favors. Thanks, Tucker! The other big conservative talking point is that Hispanics are flooding across the borders to take advantage of our free social services. The cold hard facts tell the opposite story. The things we typically define as welfare, like Medicaid, child welfare payments, SNAP, formerly food stamps, unemployment insurance, disability, Social Security, etc., none of these things are available to undocumented workers. In fact, as ruthless as this sounds, there's a hidden benefit to the United States when it comes to Social Security that pundits and politicians rarely talk about. According to policy groups that study Social Security, and even Social Security's own actuary, undocumented workers pay about $13 billion a year into Social Security. They do this either through deductions from privately held payrolls or from providing false Social Security numbers. That's $13 billion a year going directly into the Social Security trust that will never benefit the workers who contributed because they're not eligible to take them out. There are only 2 benefits in pure economic terms that are available: public school education and emergency health care. So let's talk about it. First off, public education is a real thing. No child can be turned away from public school regardless of immigration status. If their parents or guardians can prove residency with an address or a utility bill or what have you, then the child can attend school. BS, right? How dare they? Well, here's the problem with hating on this. And don't get me wrong, teaching English as a second language is a great challenge for teachers and something that we are not properly equipped to handle in most districts across the country. That being said, strictly from a funding perspective, because we fund school districts through the local tax base, then these students are underwritten in the same manner that 40% of the country that rents and does not own housing. If you pay rent to someone, then the homeowner or the apartment owner pays real estate taxes that support the local school district. In terms of healthcare, we did talk about this previously, covering the role of think tanks in shaping public policy. Recall that Obamacare was based on Romneycare in Massachusetts, which was a policy designed by the Heritage Foundation as a way to punish poor, uninsured people, most notably undocumented immigrants. Their idea was that if everyone was compelled to take health insurance coverage, then poor people would have to pay private insurers and stop seeking emergency room care even for the most basic of ailments. Obviously, that's a whole different story. The way that we portion out healthcare in this country is stupid, it's mean, and it's brutal. But Obamacare, or Romneycare, was specifically designed to punish poor people and line the pockets of insurance companies. Of course, that's not a popular narrative for liberals, but it doesn't make it false. So the one benefit you have, if you're an undocumented human in this country, is that you are still free to walk into an emergency room and receive emergency care and treatment. Not Medicaid, Medicare, temporary aid to needy families or TANF, child care, adoption assistance, low-income home energy assistance, Social Security, SNAP, food benefits. None of these is available to undocumented immigrants. This is probably one of the biggest, most oft-repeated lies on Fox News. Oh, and here's a fun fact. It wasn't always this way. There were some benefits that undocumented immigrants qualified for in the past. Do you know who took them all away? Was it George Bush? Richard Nixon? Donald Trump? This guy?
Rather than making them or talking about putting up a fence, why don't we work out some recognition of our mutual problems, make it possible for them to come here legally with a work permit, and then while they're working and earning here, they pay taxes here. And when they want to go back, they can go back and they can cross and open the border both ways.
That was surreal. Anyway, no, the president who took away any potential welfare benefits for undocumented immigrants was Bill Clinton. But that's for another day. Before we get into what the Biden administration has and hasn't done, let's go through some important definitions. To understand immigration, you have to understand the concept of net international migration, or NIM. So the equation for NIM is as follows. Foreign-born immigration minus foreign-born emigration plus Puerto Rican migration plus net native-born immigrants equals net international migration, or NIM for short. So let's break it down. Foreign-born immigration is the number of people that gained entry into the country from foreign nations, legally or illegally, whatever. Foreign-born emigration is the outflow, the number of people from those same categories who left the United States. Believe it or not, there are people who want to leave here. Net Puerto Rico migration is the total increase or decrease to the Puerto Rican population. Net native-born immigrants are babies born to immigrants in the United States, or anchor babies, as right-wing douche nozzles like to refer to them as though they're not human. Add them all up and you get NIM. Now, what's fascinating about NIM is that it was extraordinarily low in the first 2 years of Biden's term. Revised NIM figures for 2021 showed 376,000 net migrants into the country, all sources, in and out. It's a far cry from the millions of border crossings claimed on Fox News. This was down from 700,000 in 2020, a figure that's a little harder to nail down due to the pandemic. Now, for the MAGA crew. The other 3 years under your dear leader were 1.1 million, 1 million, and 915,000. In 2022, under Joe Biden, the NIM figures returned to the average number of 1 million under Donald Trump. So taking COVID out of the equation and just looking at the first 2 years' averages under both Trump and Biden, Trump's average was 1 million and Biden's was 680,000. How did Biden do it? Well, first off, he let visas expire, ramped up expedited removal of migrants, sending them back to their home countries without hearings, upheld Trump's policy of prioritizing high-wage potential immigrants, and allowed Title 242 to stand, which automatically allows us to expel anyone seeking asylum under emergency pandemic authority. In short, Joe Biden has been far more ruthless and effective than Donald Trump ever was. I'm not cheering this fact, I'm just stating it. Now let me introduce a little wrinkle to our story. We did a rather extensive podcast on something called the Washington Consensus, and I'll link it in the notes below. The upshot is that an economist named John Williamson coined a term to reflect American policy toward Latin America and the Caribbean. The consensus being that Washington has generally considered Latin America a colonial outpost without the trappings of classic colonialism. Now, don't get me wrong, that exists in certain instances as well. But Williamson was capturing the attitude and the sentiment toward this part of the world. We have a very paternalistic view of Latin America, and not in a helpful way, like an abusive, absentee father sort of way. And it's really dumb. Even in really blunt economic terms, if we learned anything from the pandemic, it's that the supply chain is fragile, and many of our trading partners are really far away. Latin America is rich in resources, both human and natural. But we've taken a terrible approach to partnering with many of its nations because they have a tendency to go through rather leftist periods, and we still maintain a Cold War view of the world. So rather than partner, we plunder. We support coup attempts, overthrow democratically elected leaders, destabilize economies through sanctions, pressure countries to denationalize their interests, and let corporations pillage resources. We really do have a terrible history. And so when poor citizens of these nations find their way to our border, we turn our backs to them and blame their home nations. It's really absurd. Opportunity abounds in Latin America if we pick our heads up for a minute and see what's right under our noses. Conservative commentators will focus on the southern border because there are border towns paying a heavy price for the influx of migrants. But they never tell you that more people are turned away than ever get in, both legally and illegally. And one of the reasons the NIM figures rose so much this year is because the Biden administration has recognized the perilous position of an economy with more job openings than people seeking work. So of the 1 million net new entrants into the country, half of those were through the issuance of permanent visas as we work through a backlog. Travel visas are up, worker visas, student visas, and we're catching up with family preference visas as well. All signs that immigration is normalizing once again. And of those who, quote, illegally present themselves at the border and are waiting adjudication, take a listen to where they're from. These are the top countries: Mexico, India, China, El Salvador, Dominican Republic, Philippines, Cuba, Syria, Burma, Ukraine, Sudan, Congo, Afghanistan, Iraq, Venezuela, Colombia, and Peru. That is amazing. And it's beautiful. Ron Death Sentence and Greg Abbott have responded to the influx at the border by sending people to the streets of New York, Boston, and Kamala Harris's front yard. Because scoring political points is more important to them than being human. And they're stealing the thunder away from all of the positive discussions we should be having. It's a good thing that there's a waiting list from people across the world who did anything and everything in their power to find their way to the United States. And we need to be asking ourselves, what can be done to support the countries in Latin America who are sending refugees? How can we be a better partner? Instead of being a lousy father, can we be a loving sibling? The bottom line is that racism sells, and yes, border crossings are a real problem, but we're allowing falsehoods and lies on the right to cloud the discussion. We have vacancies in the job market that need to be filled. You can't get pissed off at the local taco or burger joint when they post a sign that they're closing early because there are staff issues and also try to kick everyone out of the country. There's a logical happy medium to all of this, but until we take back the narrative and start acting like the superpower that we are and partnering with our neighboring nations, we're going to continue to let xenophobia and racism win the day. Here endeth the video.